Repeating, a sniper with a high-powered rifle has taken up a position on the observation deck.
On August 1st, 1966, 25-year-old Charles Whitman climbed to the top of the University of Texas Tower and in just 96 minutes shot 45 people before 2 Austin police officers brought him down. The night before ascending the tower, Whitman brutally murdered his wife and his mother. In doing so, Whitman committed what was then the largest mass murder in American history.
Charles Whitman was the first in a number of ways. He was the first person to take his guns and go to school.
The final tally was grim. In less than 24 hours, Charles Whitman caused the deaths of 17 people and horrifically wounded 31 others. The mass killing spree left an indelible mark on the state's flagship university and the residents of its capital city. In an age before Columbine, before Oklahoma City, before 9/11, Charles Whitman was America's first domestic terrorist. Charles Joseph Whitman was described by many as the all-American boy. Growing up in Lake Worth, Florida, he became an accomplished piano player. At the age of 12 years and 3 months, the youngest Eagle Scout in the world. He was also a crack shot with many of the rifles that filled the Whitman home. His accomplishments, however, came at a cost. Charles Whitman's father, C.A. Whitman, was a stern disciplinarian and frequently beat his wife and children for the smallest transgressions. After a night of drinking on his 18th birthday, Charles was beaten and thrown into the family pool by his outraged father. The next morning, Charles Whitman joined the Marine Corps. Used to tough discipline and familiar with firearms, Charles excelled on the rifle range and achieved the rating of sharpshooter. Soon, his superiors recommended the young Marine for an engineering scholarship, and in the fall of 1961, Charles Whitman was admitted to the University of Texas. Once enrolled, Charles met the woman who would become the love of his life. Kathleen Leisner entered the University of Texas as a beautiful young woman from South Texas. Their courtship was quick, and on August 17, 1962, the two young lovers were married in Kathy's hometown church in Needville, Texas. Once back in Austin, Charlie quickly fell into academic trouble, lost his scholarship, and returned to the enlisted ranks of the Marines. His second experience was nothing like his first. Missing his wife and eager to return to Austin, Charlie fell into trouble, spent time locked up in the brig, and as soon as his enlistment was up, returned to Texas and re-enrolled in the university as an architectural engineering student. Eager to finish, Charles took a heavy load of courses, but soon complained of headaches and had trouble concentrating on his studies. As a freshman in 1961, Whitman had remarked to friends that the university's main building, the Tower, was a perfect fortress in which one man could hold off an army. In the summer of 1966, Charles Whitman's thoughts returned to the Tower and its potential as the perfect sniper's nest.
Charles Whitman was leading a very stressful and tormented life. It developed into anger. The incident that probably brought about his final decision to die, but to take a lot of people with him before he did it, was when his mother and father separated in February or March of 1966.
In the final days of July 1966, Whitman, experiencing frequent headaches and convinced he would be unable to achieve success, made up his mind to die. His death, he decided, would be as spectacular as possible, a death in which his father would be humiliated in front of the nation. Accordingly, on the night of July 31st, Whitman began preparations for a one-man massacre. After dropping off his wife, Catherine, for her shift at the Southwestern Bell Telephone Exchange, Whitman returned to his house in South Austin and began to type out a letter.
It was after much thought that I decided to kill my wife, Kathy, tonight, after I pick her up from work at the telephone company. I love her dearly, and she has been as fine a wife to me as any man could ever hope to have. I truly do not consider this world worth living in, and am prepared to die, and I do not want to leave her to suffer alone in it. I intend to kill her as painlessly as possible.
After hiding the letter out of sight, Whitman picked up his wife, dropped her off at home, and drove to his mother's apartment building at 13th and Guadalupe. Entering penthouse apartment 505 a few minutes after midnight, Whitman quickly turned to the business at hand. Based on the timeline established by the night watchman's records, it appears Whitman attacked his mother, Margaret Whitman, as soon as she shut the door. Although the exact details can never be known, it is surmised that Whitman first strangled his mother with a 5-foot piece of rubber hose, then crushed the back of her skull with a heavy object and smashed the wedding and engagement rings on her left hand. Finally, he stabbed her in the heart with a large hunting knife. In a macabre reversal of roles, Whitman then tucked his mother into bed. As he had done earlier in the evening, Whitman sat down to leave an explanation for his crime.
To whom it may concern, I have just taken my mother's life. I am very upset over having done it. However, I feel that if there is a heaven, she is definitely there now. The intense hatred I feel for my father is beyond description.
Before returning home, Whitman left a note taped to the front door of the apartment to forestall anyone from checking on his mother. Returning to his small home on Jewell Street, Whitman took out the large hunting knife, entered the front bedroom, and quickly stabbed his sleeping wife through the heart. It is doubtful and perhaps merciful that Catherine Whitman never knew what happened. Returning to his typed note, Whitman then added in longhand,
8/1/66, Monday, 3 a.m., both dead.
When the sun rose, Whitman drove to the Sears department store in Hancock Center, where he purchased a 12-gauge Sears shotgun on credit. Returning home, he sawed off both the stock and barrel. Working quickly now and methodically, Whitman packed his Marine Corps footlocker with everything he would need for a long siege. After his death, the Austin Police Department listed the contents, including a Remington 6mm bolt-action rifle, an N1 carbine, a .35 caliber Remington pump rifle, the sawed-off Sears 12-gauge shotgun, a 9mm Luger pistol, a Galisi Brassica pistol, and a .357 Smith & Wesson Magnum revolver. Also included an AM/FM radio, a 3.5-gallon jug of water, a 3.5-gallon jug of gasoline, flashlight batteries, several lengths of rope, a compass, a ballpoint pen, a hatchet, a hammer, a cigarette lighter, a canteen full of water, a hunting knife, a pocket knife, a 10-inch pipe wrench, eyeglasses and case, kitchen matches, binoculars, charcoal starter, an army duffel bag, a flashlight, earplugs, tape, gloves, a deer bag, bread and sweet rolls, 12 assorted cans of food, a jar of honey, a roll of toilet paper, and over 700 rounds of ammunition. Charles Whitman was prepared to stay atop the tower for several days. Whitman dressed in light blue working man's coveralls and lashed his footlocker to a rented dolly. At 11 a.m., with a temperature 90 degrees and climbing, Charles Whitman climbed into his car and drove to the Texas Tower. Before leaving, he stopped to write one final note for the police.
At the Whitman home, Lieutenant Merle Wells talked with newsmen about the discovery and about a note the man had written.
In this letter, he said that he was going to kill his wife and mother to save them the embarrassment of what he was about to do. That the reason for him killing them is that he has been having severe headaches and has been to a psychiatrist. And
he said that about himself?
Yes. No, I don't.
What is the condition of the house right now?
It's very neat and clean, and it's not anything out of order. She's lying in bed on her back. She has 3 stab wounds instead of 2, as we thought at first. And we think that they were caused by that large hunting knife that was with the stuff up at the tower.
Arriving at the tower, Whitman parked at the base of the building, rolled his dolly into elevator number 2, and began the 30-second ride to the 27th floor. After exiting the elevator, Whitman slowly manhandled his footlocker up 2 flights of stairs until he reached the 28th floor and the entrance to the observation deck. The first to die was 47-year-old receptionist Edna Townsley. From police photographs, it is believed that Whitman struck Townsley in the back of the head near her desk and then dragged the dying woman across the floor and deposited her body behind a small beige sofa on the room's east side. A young couple, Cheryl Bont and Don Walden, were outside on the observation deck.
We decided to go on in and not stay to hear the chimes. So as we walked into the reception area, the first thing I noticed was that the receptionist was not at her desk, but it was almost noon, so I rationalized she was probably already gone to lunch. And then in front of us was a reddish-brown stain all the way across the floor that had not been there when we came up. And the only thing I could think of was varnish. It looked like the color of varnish, and I thought, well, maybe they were going to varnish the floor. I pointed it out to Don so that we could step over it. And as we're getting ready to step over it, we heard something, and there was a movement to the right, and as we looked to the right, Whitman was there, and he turned around and faced us and had a rifle in each hand. And as he turned around, I smiled and spoke to him, and he said hello to me as well. And again, we didn't stop and carry on a conversation, didn't ask what he was doing or anything. We just kept walking. Don told me later he wondered if he was going to go out to shoot pigeons, but he didn't ask him that, and probably that was a very good thing. I think what saved us is we didn't stop walking through the room, we didn't stop talking, we didn't stop and ask him what he was doing, we did not impede what he had in mind, we did not question him. We simply interrupted him for about 15 seconds. While we were going down one elevator, the Gabor family from Texarkana was going up the other elevator because they were right behind us. He was still in the reception room, had not yet gone out on the observation deck, and they tried to go up that staircase that we had just gone down. And he shot 4 of the 5 members of that family. So, I mean, there's no reason why he shouldn't have shot us, except that we caught him off guard. He wasn't ready.
In the days following, Austin Police Chief Bob Miles would remark that the two were the luckiest people in Austin. Moments later, 2 families on vacation, the Lamports and the Gabors, were ambushed in the stairwell leading to the 28th floor. Within moments, Marguerite Lamport and her 16-year-old nephew, Mark Gabor, were dead, killed by at least 3 blasts from Whitman's sawed-off shotgun. The attack also critically injured 19-year-old Michael Gabor and his mother, Mary. The staircase now awash in blood. The bodies of the living and the dead tumbled down the stairs, where they would languish for nearly 2 hours. 6 years later, the terribly injured Mary Gabor would publish her account of the family's tragic encounter with Charles Whitman in an autobiography entitled The Impossible Tree. With the landing secure, Charles Whitman wrapped a white headband around his forehead, walked out through the glass-paneled door and into the searing Texas heat. Opening his footlocker, he removed the 6mm Remington, leaned over the southern edge of the wall, and took careful aim at the innocent souls below. The first to be shot was 18-year-old Claire Wilson. She was 8 months pregnant and was strolling across the mall with her boyfriend and father of her child, Thomas Frederick Ekman. Whitman's first shot pierced Claire's womb and shattered the skull of her unborn baby boy. As she fell to the pavement, her boyfriend reached for her and was shot in the upper back. He was killed instantly.
This is Neil Spelson, Red Rover, on the University of Texas campus. This is a warning to the citizens of Austin. Stay away from the university area. And there is a sniper on the university tower firing at will.
As the bodies began to fall, reporters and cameramen from KTBC Channel 7 began to get word that something was happening on campus.
So we got back to the station and walked into the foyer of the station and looked down, and there was a picture of the top of the UT tower, very shaky, just going up and down as if it were being shot from a long distance. And we looked at it, and we looked over at the phone receptionist like, what's going on? And that's when she told us that somebody was up on top of the tower firing at people. And we both just looked at each other and just took off upstairs to start grabbing camera equipment. And we were coming downstairs when Charles Ward, who was another one of the reporters, who was off duty. He did the evening news, and he was, of course, off duty at that time of day, but he'd heard it on his television, and he'd come running over, and we met him in the foyer, and Charles was in the National Guard with some of the rest of us, and he had grabbed his steel helmet that he'd been issued, so he was wearing a steel pot helmet, which we thought was a little over the top at the time, but that's what he wanted to do. So we all piled into one of the vehicles and took off over to the campus. We worked our way up the South Mall, under the trees again, and finally got up to Batts Hall and went up to the, I guess, the second floor. Up to this time, we could see people hiding behind trees, sitting there. I stuck the camera out the window and started shooting the footage that you've probably seen before of the tower with the puffs of smoke coming up where people were shooting. And I flipped on the camera, and I remember thinking at the time, it was sort of detached. I mean, it was as if we're watching it on TV. And then I started getting this peculiar feeling that a number of people have described later, that I could see him, therefore, theoretically, he could see me. And I got this almost crawly feeling on me, like you know, the gun sights on me or something like that.
I then jumped into a mobile unit myself and rushed to the campus and started broadcasting live. Interestingly, I saw several citizens of Austin dressed in normal shirt sleeves and khaki pants, carrying high-powered weapons, running toward me and running toward the campus. Well, what happened, they were citizens who heard the broadcast and heard me say, "Stay away," but their instinctive reaction was to the contrary. They grabbed their own deer rifles that they had, rushed to the campus, and started firing at the sniper, almost like a vigilante effort. In retrospect, a lot of folks were critical of these average citizens coming out with a weapon and engaging in a firefight with a madman, but I looked at it totally differently. These guys who fired at the top of the tower, when they turned their weapons toward the tower, they pinned Charles Whitman down. And after his initial surge, where he did most of his damage, up until the time he was actually killed, the latter part of that time frame, maybe as much as 30, 45 minutes, he did very little damage. One, because people were hiding and people were staying out of the way, but two, because he was pinned down by these citizens who were shooting back at him, along with a few of the police officers who got their own weapons that they had at home.
One of the first police officers to arrive on campus was 22-year-old Billy Speed. Officer Speed, seen here crouching down and below a statue of Jefferson Davis, must have assumed he was covered by the thick limestone railings. Officer Speed assumed he was safe. But Whitman, warming to his game, proved him wrong. Whitman's first shot missed, but a second round hit Officer Speed in the shoulder and tore into his chest. Students frantically tried to help the officer. He was loaded into one of the first ambulances to arrive, taken to Brackenridge Hospital, but was dead on arrival. In the days following, KTBC produced and aired a 30-minute special on the Whitman murders. With Neil Spelce in the anchor chair, the program featured this interview filmed live during the shooting.
Countless students and innocent bystanders fell without knowing what hit them. A boy riding a bicycle was picked off with deadly accuracy. Time and time again, men risked their lives to try to save others, and this man shown here hauling a dead man to safety was one such man. Charles Ward talked with him after he got back.
One of those who is out of breath now after running out onto the mall rescuing those who have been shot is Brian Ellison of Austin, who has been in Vietnam and has been back for 2 years. Brian, how many have you gone out to rescue?
Today, 2.
What did you have to do?
Run hard and keep low.
Did you have any trouble getting them up, or did any shots come close to you while you were out there?
No shots came close to me. Just the last one. He was dead. He was dead weight. He was a little hard to pick up, too limp. Not like someone who's knocked out.
How many have you seen that are dead today?
Just one. I hope not anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is a KLRN News Bulletin. Once again, a sniper has taken up a position on the observation deck, on the tower, on the main building, on the campus of the University of Texas and is firing with his high-powered rifle at people on the campus.
As the tower's chimes sounded out the noon hour, the city of Austin began to witness the siege live on television. The public broadcasting station, KLRN, made history that day by airing the sniper attacks live on television.
There he is, right in that hole.
What he was doing was so preposterous, no one could actually believe it was taking place. The program director figured that what we had was the possibility of a close-up view from our rear studio, because it was on Intercampus Drive. It was virtually across the driveway from the first ground level floor of the tower. And then above us, some 200 feet, was the top of the tower with the observation deck. We managed to find a lens that was used on a film camera, affixed it to our television camera, and aimed it out the back door at the top of the UT tower. It was broadcast. We were able to find in the close-up of the observation deck the blurred movement of someone moving around the tower.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can see the sniper if you look closely in the pothole at the bottom of the picture, just under the rim of the observation deck.
Later, we would find out that, yes, indeed, the networks and all the state TV stations had us tuned in and were carrying our broadcast.
Whitman was moving fast now. He transversed all four sides of the observation deck, but found his most fertile killing ground on the west side, facing the section of Guadalupe Street known to Austinites as the Drag. For many of those pinned down on the hot sidewalks and storefronts, life and death was a question of inches.
I had a standing lunch date with two of my old Longhorn band pals to meet at the Rexall drugstore at 11:20 every day, and then we'd sit there and eat hamburgers and Cokes, and like we said, we solved the problems of the world, you know. Lady at the cash register said, "You guys better not go out there, somebody's shooting a gun." And we remember, this was 1966. The whole concept of people just, somebody shooting people as a part of a mass murder situation just wasn't in the vocabulary of our mental landscape at that point, you know. And so, being the knowledgeable 20-year-olds we were, who know everything anyway, we just went right on outside and stood there. You know, and I remember looking back after she said that, though, at the clock. It was 11:55. I remember that like it was yesterday. I turned back around for somebody to face the campus again, and no more than 15 seconds later, a high-powered rifle shot came past my right ear. And it hit a gentleman that was standing inside the lip of the newsstand right there. He was a 38-year-old military veteran with 6 children and a wife to support. And I didn't realize he'd gotten hit at that point because we were too busy running back inside the drugstore. I mean, we set a land speed record for getting back inside the drugstore. And that's where I stayed during the whole 90 minutes or so that were left in the whole rampage. At that point, I realized, boy, how close did I come, you know? I mean, I later retraced the whole situation, and I was about he was about 4, maybe 5 feet to my right when he got hit, you know. He did live for like 2 more hours at Brackenridge. They had a team of surgeons trying to do what they could for him, but it was just too much damage to his midsection to fix him, you know.
The Drag quickly became a scene of horror. 17-year-old Karen Griffith, a beautiful young woman preparing for her senior year at Lanier High School, where Charles Whitman's wife Kathy had taught the year before, was walking north down Guadalupe when she was shot through the lung. Transported to Brackenridge Hospital, Karen struggled for her life, but died 1 week later. In the spring of 1967, the Lanier High School Viking yearbook included a dedication to both Karen Griffith and Kathleen Whitman.
It's like a battle scene. It's like, there's another shot and another shot. There are 2 different kinds of shots. Apparently, police are returning the fire now. Gordon Wilkerson is watching the man through a telephoto lens on his camera, getting the shots and watching, and sees the person there. Gordon, is it possible to describe the person? What color shirt is he wearing? Is he a light shirt? You can't tell about his hair whether he's a dark-haired person or not. Is he wearing glasses? And is he light or fair-skinned? From this distance, Gordon Wilkerson reports fair skin.
There was kind of a small lull in the shooting and what have you, and I looked over to the left, and there was a big old lumbering armored car driving toward one of the bodies that was laying out in front of me. It was obvious what they wanted to try to do because one of them was wounded laying there, and they were trying to scoop him up. In fact, there had been several people try to run out there. And, not successful at all. In fact, they didn't get more than 2 or 3 steps and decided that wasn't smart. He was really peppering that thing. It was kind of a surprise, but it's, I thought, well, at the time it's a pretty good idea because nobody could get a tank from anywhere around in any timely fashion, so that's the next best thing, I guess. Try to save a life.
As was demonstrated repeatedly that day, Charles Whitman was an outstanding marksman. The farthest shot was Billy Snowden, a basketball coach who stopped into the barber shop for a haircut. Hearing shots, he and the barber stepped outside to investigate. From over 500 yards away, Whitman fired, hitting Snowden in the shoulder. Snowden would survive, but the nerve damage ended his basketball career. Whitman continued to demonstrate his prowess with shots so accurate and from such a distance, the victims never knew what hit them.
On August 1st, 1966, Roydell Schmidt and I were working partners. About 12:05, we got a call of partial no lights at a residence off of Red River Street. We came over to where the Chevrolet car was parked, kneeled down behind it, and looked up toward the tower. And at that time, this tree was a whole lot smaller, and there was just very little space between the lower limbs of this tree and the hood of that Chevrolet car. We stayed here approximately 5 to 10 minutes. Roydell said, "We better get out of here," I believe was the exact words. And just as Roydell started to stand up, he grabbed his stomach and said, "I'm hit, I'm hit." Well, I was on one side and Don Carlson was on the other side of Roydell, so we each grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back a little bit so that he would be shielded by the tree. And then I went over to the city vehicle, got a first aid kit, and called into the electric department dispatcher to send an ambulance. The ambulance pulled around the corner from 19th Street. They loaded him in the ambulance, and Don Carlson went to the hospital with him. I went back to the service building, and I was told then that Roydell had died on the way to the hospital.
As students ran for cover, Charles Whitman proved that no one was safe from his deadly skill with a rifle. 18-year-old freshman John Scott Allen and several young women ran to a window inside the Student Union building between the 2nd and 3rd floors. As they were indoors, the students assumed they had reached safety. They were wrong. As they peered out the east window towards the tower, Whitman was peering back. A bullet struck the side of the building and ricocheted through the window pane. The force of the bullet sent glass shards flying into the faces of the 2 girls, while the bullet itself struck John Allen's upper right arm. Within minutes, the landing was covered in blood.
This is an eerie situation. The sirens have not stopped screaming since we arrived on the university campus. If 9 persons have already been brought into Breckenridge Hospital, then more must be on their way because these ambulances are running back to the hospital and they're running back hot.
As the bodies fell across the campus, ambulances responded from funeral homes across the city. In short order, 39 people, either killed or wounded by Whitman, were taken to the city's Breckenridge Hospital.
I guess we all thought it couldn't be happening, but at the same time, we had to do what had to be done. We'll worry about this after we get the work done. But right now, we have to attend the patient. I myself pronounced 4, maybe 5 patients dead. The wounds were so obviously mortal. A girl who was about 6 or 7 months pregnant was shot, and when it exited her pelvis, it disrupted one of the major arteries in her pelvis, and they almost lost her in surgery. That was really a heroic effort, but they succeeded, and she was perhaps the last one to recover. I think it was 7 or 8 or 9 months before she was fully recovered from those wounds, but she lost a child.
One of the things we do in this business of news reporting is we're very conscious of relatives of people who are
injured or serious. We seldom ever broadcast the names of people who have been killed in any manner until relatives have had a chance to be notified. It's just the decent thing to do. In this case, with the university being so much an integral part of this city and its life, and so many people being injured and shot, we made a quick decision at the very beginning. We've got to release the names of those who have been shot or those who are injured or whatever, just because it is important for people to know that this one person may have been shot. Well, there were thousands of other people who knew folks who were in or around the campus, and they needed to be reassured that this was not one of theirs as well. So we did broadcast those names. Joe Roddy was at Brackenridge Hospital in the emergency room, but Joe went down the list of names, and it tragically, what you always fear when you release the name of someone before you notify the relatives, the negative impact of that happened, and it happened in our own newsroom. Paul Bolton was the first news director at Channel 7. Paul Bolton was the first news director for KTBC Radio. And he was the first face and voice to deliver broadcast journalism to this community. As Joe was reading the list of names, he went through all the lists and says, that's it for now. We don't know if these are dead or injured, but these are the folks who have been identified as brought into Brackenridge Hospital. As he finished that report and says, and now back to you, or something like that, Paul Bolton, our news director at the time that was retired, came into the newsroom and was working, and he was there and heard Joe's report on the radio. He broke in on the air and says, Joe, I can hear his voice now just wavering. Joe, would you please read those names again? Everybody's interested in those names. I think you have my grandson on that list. It was his grandson. Joe read the list again and went through it, talked about it, and said, as he went down the list, he didn't know it. He didn't know the grandson's name. His grandson was his namesake grandson. It was Paul Bolton Sontag, and it turns out that Paul Bolton Sontag and his girlfriend, Claudia Rutt, were getting ready to enroll at the University of Texas as freshmen. They graduated from high school in Austin, and they were walking down the drag, going into the co-op, buying books and items that they needed for the fall semester when they were both shot and killed. Paul Bolton heard that on the air. After Joe finished that list, the next voice you heard was not Bolton's. The next voice you heard was Jay Hodgson. And Jay broke in and says, that's it, Joe, I think we've got it. And then he immediately took Paul Bolton out of the newsroom.
In the aftermath of the Whitman murders, city leaders realized the funeral home drivers were inadequately trained in emergency care. In the months following the murders, the city of Austin created the Austin Ambulance Service and the Modern Emergency Medical Services, or EMS, as it is known today, was created. As dozens of deer rifles returned fire in a vain effort to pick Whitman off, 3 police officers and a civilian named Alan Crum took matters into their own hands. Making their way across campus, the men rode the elevator to the top floor and prepared to face the unknown killer on the confined space of the observation deck.
As I was going up the elevator, I decided, hey, this is getting pretty serious, because you could still hear all that fire, all that shooting. You know, it was kind of muffled in the elevator, but you could still hear it. Being a good Catholic that I was, I decided to say an act of contrition, which is a prayer that I was taught to say in case imminent death is probable, that this way atone for your sins, and maybe the pearly gates will be open for you, you know. So I said this prayer as I went up. When I reached the 27th floor, of course, I had my gun out, and the elevator door open, and I was facing Jerry Day's pistol, and this other man that had a white shirt on and had a rifle, and they were pointing it at me, and I was pointing the gun at him, and so it's just King's X. We smiled and let out a sigh of relief, and I got out there. So a gentleman came out, and he had a white shirt on, a pair of white shoes, and he was bloody, and the white shoes were bloody, women's shoes. And he said that SOB has killed my family up there, and he let me have your gun, I'll go kill him. And Jerry and I had to wrestle with him to restrain him because he wanted to get our weapons. And we couldn't have a distraction like that, so we wrestled him to the next elevator, and we pushed him inside the elevator, and Jerry had to restrain him and hold him, and we sent Jerry down with him to get him out of the way. And I started going up when the man with the rifle said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go look for the guy. And he said, well, you're not going by yourself. He says, I'm coming with you. And boy, I felt so happy that he volunteered to come with me, because at that time I felt pretty lonely, you know, but now that he was at my side, I was happy, ready to go. So there's only one exit, and that's a glass door on the southeast corner. He had the dolly that he had used to transport all that materials up there. He had it propped against the door. I pushed and really had to do a lot of effort before I could push the door back, and the dolly went over, and he clang, 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 you know. And so I stood there at the door, cracked it open, and I was waiting with my pistol. I thought he'd come to investigate the sound, but there was so much rifle fire that I guess he didn't hear it. For some reason, I turned around, and that was Houston McCoy was behind me. He had a shotgun. He had come up and come out. He's a tall guy. He's over 6 feet tall. And he was standing kind of straight up with his head down, and I had to motion to him with my hand, give him some hand signals to get down, and it didn't seem like he comprehended, but a couple of rounds hit above his head, you know, a couple of feet up there. And I think he got the message then, because then he got down. Then I finally saw the sniper sitting in a sitting position, aiming his rifle at the southwest corner. And right away I thought, that civilian has left his position and he's aiming at him, he's going to shoot him, so I fired a shot at him and I hit him on the left side, and he jumped up to his feet like a cat, and he was trying to bring that M1 carbine to bear down on me, and I just kept advancing and shooting, and I hollered at McCoy to fire, which he did. McCoy hit him with a shotgun, and it just kind of spun him around. My gun was empty at that time. I dropped my gun, I reached and got the shotgun and blasted him one more time as he hit the deck. And that was the end of it.
Chief Miles had a diagram prepared to illustrate what happened then.
Is drawing a diagram here that will show you roughly, which is north now, Bill?
This is north.
Okay.
South, east, west. Martinez came out here and crawled around at this point.
That's the roof over there.
This is that's the elevator. Looking down on top of the thing. Up here is the bell. This is the wall around the inner part of the building here. The bell is above here. Martinez came out and went around the east side crawling. Crum came out and went west this way. And as the subject was sitting here, leaning up back this way with his gun pointing this direction. As Martinez rounded this corner here, he saw him with his gun in this direction. He knew Mr. Crum was coming this way, and he had to come around the corner at the same time. Yeah. Martinez fired from here, from this point here.
As he northwest. As he swung his rifle toward him, he fired.
As he saw him leveling the rifle, or pointing the rifle in this direction, and knowing that Mr. Crum was here.
He was pointing the rifle at Crum when Martinez fired.
And Martinez came around this way.
So Martinez fired, and the reign of terror came to an end.
All of a sudden, things got quiet. And then Neil Spouse said on the radio, it's over. We just, en masse, came out of the stores.
The entire campus was flooded with people. People just from everywhere, literally hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people who had been in the buildings or had been on the periphery, just came rushing out onto the campus. Like a magnet had just sucked them all into that.
Just as I got to the tower, two detectives were bringing out Martinez, and he was in shock. I tell you, that guy, he just you know, almost rigid, and had some blood on his arm, and I asked one of the detectives, said, is that his blood or the other guy? And they said the other guy's, and man, they just kept going. They didn't even slow down. Put out an extra that night. That's probably the first time since, well, maybe World War II started.
Alan Crum, the deputized civilian who faced Whitman on top of the tower, appeared on KTBC to tell his story.
The man here beside me is Alan Crum. He was deputized to go up on the tower with the two policemen who ended the gun battle. Mr. Crum, could you tell us how you happened to be in the tower building in the first place?
Well, I became involved in this when I looked out of the co-op windows and saw a boy shot across the street. I went across the street to investigate because I thought it was a small fight. And as I stepped out the door, I heard the sound of shots. And Officer Martinez and myself and Officer Day started up the staircase where we worked our way up to the next floor, and we began to search the offices up there. Where we found 3 more people, and one of these gentlemen, his family was in the corridor, and they had all been shot.
Now, the people on the 26th floor were not hurt, but the people...
No, sir. The next half flight of stairs up was where this man had shot them all in the corridor.
When did you finally locate Whitman?
It was quite a few minutes because we worked our way up. We thought perhaps he might be in this corridor, and we didn't know the building and had to work rather cautiously. We worked our way up to the end of the corridor where a set of stairs went to the left, and I covered with the rifle for Martinez and Officer Day while they got the boy that was still alive out of the line of fire, because he told us the man was outside and couldn't see us. While Officer Day was taking care of the wounded boy, as far as I know, Officer Martinez and I, we took the stairs. And we got to the top of the stairs, and this man had barricaded the staircase with a desk and a chair and a waste can, and we figured he was either in there or out on the walk-around ledge. So we very cautiously pushed the desk out, and we saw blood on the floor, and we realized someone had been killed up there or badly wounded. And we found a lady up behind the couch. And then Officer Day joined us again, and we began to work our way out on the ledge, this walk-around ledge thing.
Did you know where he was when you actually went out on the ledge?
At this time, we still didn't know if there was 1 or 2 men up there. It was a very good possibility of 2 because of the fast rate of fire. We figured that we'd cover all the windows, cover the man going out the door, using our old infantry-style tactics. Officer Martinez went out first. I covered the east and south windows. He covered the door and the west windows. He went out, and they covered as much as he could also. And then we got Martinez out the door. He covered the north walk and the west walk, and I got out the door, and they came out, and they went to the northeast corner. I stayed in the southeast and worked my way slightly up the path there, and they made contact with him first. And I thought I heard him running southwards on the west walk, so I fired 1 shot down the walkway into the wall to try to stop him there. And again, it sounded as if he had reversed his direction and ran back to the northwest corner, where he ran into the other officers from the northwest corner, excuse me. And they were in the northeast corner, and the firefight resumed, and they terminated it right there.
The final tally shocked a nation. In a 24-hour period, Charles Whitman murdered 15 people and severely wounded 31. If Claire Wilson's healthy unborn baby boy is included, the total rises to 16. But there was still 1 more death to record. On November 21st, 2001, David Gunby, shot on the South Mall and one of 2 victims rescued by the armored car, died from kidney failure in Dallas. After living with constant pain for 35 years and in steadily declining health, Gunby refused any further treatment. The official cause of death was listed as a homicide. 3.5 decades after he climbed the tower, Charles Whitman claimed his last victim.
He was sitting up there for more than an hour, way up there on the Texas Tower, shooting from the 27th floor. He didn't choke or slash or slit them, not our Charles Joseph Whitman. He won't be an architect no more. Got up that morning.
Almost immediately after Whitman's death, questions on how such a public massacre could have happened were pondered in the nation's media. Rumors of a brain tumor began to circulate in the nation's newspapers, while notions of insanity were mulled over by criminal psychologists. Whitman's use of dexedrine tablets prior to the murders led many to blame the drug culture then emerging on the nation's college campuses. Whatever the cause, Charles Whitman began to evolve into a mislabeled anti-hero within American popular culture. Whitman was the subject of popular songs by Harry Chapin and Kinky Friedman. This trend reflected American pop culture's obsession with guns and murder.
Unfortunately, even mass murderers who make history are often given a hero status that I find personally offensive. Charles Whitman was on the verge of becoming a hero in Southwestern folklore in the same way Jesse James was, in the same way Bonnie and Clyde have become folk heroes, in the same way Billy the Kid is a very popular subject of movies and books and things like that. And in those cases, historians failed us because they allowed folklore to take over history. There was nothing glamorous about Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was a cattle rustler. There was nothing glamorous about Jesse James or Bonnie and Clyde. They were bank robbers and killers. Charles Whitman is like those people insofar as we know why he did what he did. We know why he was angry. We know why Charles Whitman killed a lot of innocent people. But in the end, he did it because he wanted to, and he was a murderer.
Following Whitman's death, President Lyndon Johnson sent notes of condolence to each of the victims' families and personally ordered the FBI to investigate.
Governor John Connally, a man who has also been felled by a sniper's bullet, said tonight in Rio de Janeiro that he is canceling the remainder of his South American
trip. Back in Texas, Governor John Connally cut short a diplomatic trip to Central America and returned to Austin. Recruiting 11 experts in medical and psychological science, the governor created the Connally Commission and sought a scientific explanation for the one-man massacre. As a result of the clamoring for answers, in less than 24 hours after Whitman's death, Dr. Deschanard performed an autopsy.
I had gotten word that night that the next day Dr. Coleman Deschanard was going to do an autopsy on Whitman out at the state hospital. So I went out to the state hospital about 9 o'clock, and he had already finished his autopsy. Now, Dr. Deschanard was a Hungarian, and we didn't have all of his credentials and so forth because he had trained behind the Iron Curtain. I asked him what he found. I'd known him quite well because I had done surgery at the state hospital when I was a resident. And I said, "Where's the body?" And I said, "Well, it's shipped back to the nursing home, to the funeral home, and is probably already en route to Florida, where he came from." So I said, "Well, what did you find?" And he said, "Well, he had a brain tumor." And I said, "Where is the brain tumor?" Well, he handed me a pickle jar that had 2 or 3 pieces of brain tissue in it, each size of a domino. And he took the lid off and he said, "See that little spot there on that one? That's a brain tumor." And I questioned that. It looked like a little smudge of peanut butter, kind of tan peanut butter, about the size of your thumbnail. And said, "Well, what part of the brain did that come from?" And he said that came from the pons. That's a part of the brain stem, and that's really sort of the switchboard, the intersection of all the connections in your brain, and it's really sort of where you live. Whitman hadn't had any neurological symptoms. He hadn't shown any paralysis. He didn't have any of the typical neurological symptoms. And with a tumor that size at that location would be fatal.
And besides that, the segment of the brain that controls behavior and stability versus instability, psychological stability, instability, is in the frontal cortex, in the front of the brain, not down in the brain stem. So I left rather befuddled, because I thought, well, I'm not so sure this is it, but the press picked it up.
Others sought a non-organic explanation for the mass murder. Several weeks before climbing the tower, Whitman sought psychiatric help from Dr. Maurice Heatley, the staff psychiatrist at the University of Texas Student Health Center.
In March, when he saw Dr. Heatley, we have to remember that that was within a couple of weeks of his going to Florida, picking up his mother, and bringing her back to Austin. So he was a very tormented young man, and there's no question about that. Dr. Heatley, as a matter of psychiatry, invites him to fantasize. I think it was called inquiry at the time. What do you think about? What do you fantasize about? What do you dream about? And so Whitman was invited to do that by Dr. Heatley, and he did. And he said, you know, sometimes I think of going to the top of the tower with a deer rifle and shooting people. Any psychiatrist who invites those kinds of comments hears them all the time. And so Dr. Heatley concluded that this was a passing fantasy. And, you know, you could even argue that it was that, because that happened in March, and the tower shooting didn't happen until a few months later, on August 1st. Everything Heatley wrote is right. He was oozing with hostility. I mean, we know that. There's no question about that. Dr. Heatley has gotten a bad rap, in my opinion, because he did the appropriate thing. He asked Whitman to come back, and Whitman didn't.
Mr. Whitman's plate was very full. He had a heavy course load. He had a marriage to support. He was a busy, sort of driven man with great accomplishments from the past. Eagle Scout at the age of 12. And that sort of personality can feel lots of pressure to do things. And in that sense, if that is frustrated, if he's not able to do all of those things that his personality drives him to do, and he comes across a situation where his anger, his frustration, his helplessness overwhelm him. And then if a tumor is there and it decreases his ability to control his behavior, then something bad can happen.
Tumor nestled at the base of his brain. He was sitting up there with his .36 Magnum, laughing wild as he bagged him. Who are we to say the boy's in? Who are we to say the boy's in? Who are we to say the boy's insane?
40 years after Charles Whitman's actions, Austin has changed and grown tremendously from the small college town it was in the summer of 1966. But surprisingly, almost all the physical locations tied to the murders still remain much as they were on that hot August day. The Goodall Wooten Dormitory, where Charles Whitman first lived as a UT freshman, still houses students in the shadow of the tower just as it did in the fall of '61. The Sears department store where Whitman purchased the 12-gauge shotgun still occupies Hancock Center. The barber shop where Billy Snowden was shot in the shoulder from a distance of over 500 yards still offers discount haircuts, although now the university's communications building blocks the 1966 line of fire. Brackenridge Hospital still serves the people of Austin. Although nothing remains of the original building, a historical marker stands outside the emergency room entrance commemorating the hospital's services to the community, including the many lives saved within its walls on August 1st, 1966. The Penthouse Apartments building where Whitman's mother lived and died still stands. 2 blocks down Guadalupe Street, the Telephone Exchange building where Kathy Whitman worked her last shift still operates. Similarly, Sidney Lanier High School, where Kathy Whitman taught science classes, still educates Austin children, although it has been converted and renamed Burnett Middle School. According to school officials, the ghost of Kathy Whitman still roams the halls at night. They are quick to add, though, that her ghost is a benevolent poltergeist without malicious intent. For those wishing to pay their respects, Kathleen Leisner Whitman is buried in the Davis Greenlawn Cemetery in Rosenberg, Texas. The small house at 906 Jewel Street, where Charlie and Kathy lived and Kathy died, remains remarkably unchanged and has become something of an Austin landmark for those interested in true crime. According to the current residents, it is not uncommon for cars to drive slowly down the street, come to a stop, and take souvenir snapshots of the Whitman house. On the grounds of the university itself, the reminders of Whitman's mass murder are everywhere. The first bullet fired at Officer Billy Speed has left a lasting impression in concrete. The flagpoles, stairwells, and sidewalks, where so many people took cover and a few bled to death, are much the same as they were in the summer of 1966. And of course, towering over all other landmarks in the Whitman tragedy is the tower itself. At once a soaring symbol of Texas pride and accomplishment, the bullet holes that pockmark its facade stand in mute testimony to its role as a scene of violent crime.
It's been 40 years. Can you imagine? That's a long time since this crazy, crazy madman climbed up there and started committing these despicable acts. Well, why has that remained so much in our public consciousness? And I've long maintained that you take the tragedies that have occurred since then, take Oklahoma City. Now that much greater in scope, killed more people, much more dramatic, politically as well as just personally for everyone. It's not talked about as much as the tower incident is with the sniper there. And I even maintain that maybe the World Trade Center at some point may come almost to this level in the future. And the reason I say this is there is no overwhelming, commanding, dominating picture of Oklahoma City. That building is gone. It was leveled. The World Trade Center is leveled. The tower, UT's tower, still stands there as a symbol of all that it was before the event. But now, after that event, 40 years ago, it carries that little bit of a memory jogger for people who look at it, oh yeah. And it's so dominant over the whole landscape of the city of Austin, you can't get away from it, just like the Capitol. It's there, it's always there. And I think even though we're not pointing at it every day and saying, oh, that's where that guy did that, it's there as a silent reminder. And I think long after another 40 years has passed, the incidents that occurred that day, August 1st, 1966, atop the tower, will still be talked about more than what happened in Oklahoma City because there's no visual reminder left standing there.
Despite the national notoriety of the Texas sniper, the observation deck remained open to the public until 4 people over a 6-year period committed suicide by jumping from the tower's heights. Exasperated university officials finally voted to close the deck permanently in 1974. For the next 24 years, the deck remained off-limits until Larry Faulkner was sworn in as the university's new president in 1999.
I settled very early on the idea of reopening the tower, even before arriving at UT as president, and I believed it was a very important thing for us to undertake. Well, it was evident to me that we wouldn't be able to reopen the tower unless we addressed the security issues. I believed that it wouldn't be possible really to get the regents persuaded to reopen it unless we made it literally impossible for the acts of the past to reoccur. You know, we hired a craftsman to design an architecturally as attractive as we could make it structure to go up there, and it took a while to execute it because it was in stainless steel. The communications power of that tower, I never ceased marveling over while I was president. It is a powerful, powerful symbolic element for the University of Texas, and I wanted to reinforce the positive power. Before I arrived as president, and during all those years when it was a forbidden place, people spent most of their time talking about the tower in terms of what happened there August 1st, 1966. And now you hardly hear those conversations.
When you think about what the University of Texas does day in and day out for the people of Texas, what is Charles Whitman? Should we allow an angry young man who murders people to dominate what we say about the tower and what it means and what the university stands for? What is Charles Whitman compared to the hundreds of thousands of people who've walked away from that place with a diploma?
The university's tower was built to symbolize pride and academic achievement in striving for success and for dedicating oneself to be the very best. Charles Whitman defiled that symbol, unable to handle life's everyday obstacles to provide for his family or achieve worthiness in the eyes of his abusive father. He chose a coward's path. In the eyes of Texas, Charles Whitman was simply a killer.